Hello, everybody. It's fifth Sunday of Lent. Next week is Palm Sunday, and the following week is Easter, if you're keeping up. And so the first lesson is Ezekiel 37, which is the Valley of the Dry Bones. And so let's think about who he's speaking to, right? So it's a people who are in exile. When they went into exile, they went in there with the idea that you know, yeah, we deserve to be chastised. We're in Babylon. This stinks. Um, but it won't last forever. And then Jeremiah says, "Oh, hey," in Jeremiah 29, he says, "Oh, hey, just so you'll know, you're going to be here 70 years. You're going to be here 70 years because for almost 500 years, you haven't given the land its Sabbath, which would be every seventh year would be a Sabbath, and every 50th year would be a Jubilee year. So occasionally you could have one that runs consecutive, right? So, boom, 2 years. You don't plan anything, you don't work, you don't do anything at all when you eat whatever comes up and whatever you've stored up. And the system was designed so that nobody got ultra wealthy, and so that your reliance wasn't on that; it was on God. And so every 7 years, you said, "Okay, I'm not going to plan anything. I'm not going to do commerce and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to live off what we have." And so every 50 years, the land reverted to its original owner. So you didn't buy land; you brought the productive capacity of the land up to the next jubilee year. But they figured lots and lots of ways around that. In the same way they do with Passover, to be honest with you. Every year, this time of year, I start getting emails from different places that say, "Hey, would you like to buy some hummets, which is yeast? Would you like to buy that?" Because they're required to get rid of all the yeast in the house. And so the way that it would work is that I would send money to some agency, and then it's sort of like carbon offsets. So it's a sham. So what they do is that then, okay, so let's say Bob over here has some hummets, and John bought it, gave the money to charity, actually kind of bought it from Bob. And so what Bob does is that Bob has a place, a little box in his house, and he puts John's yeast in there, and it stays in Bob's house, but it's John's property in Bob's house. He's just keeping it for me. I have no idea where Bob lives, not a clue. But at the end of Passover, I give it back to Bob. So I've made a donation to something. Bob has said, okay, that's John's yeast. But at the end, the transaction is complete when I give the yeast back to Bob, the yeast that I never actually had, don't know where it is, and couldn't access if I wanted to. And so they did the same kind of thing with with Sabbath years and Jubilee years, and God wasn't buying it. The workaround was only a workaround in their own minds. And so they get sent away, and they're there for 70 years. And Jeremiah says, "Here's the thing: you're going to settle in, go ahead, buy houses, plant vineyards, raise kids, give them in marriage to one another. Don't intermarry with the Babylonians, but do all those things that you would normally do. So just settle in." Ezekiel never makes it back from there. Ezekiel's tomb is actually in Iraq. There was some controversy over it during the Iraq War, actually. It and Jonah's tomb were both desecrated by ISIS because they thought they were idols, and so they were truly iconoclasts, and they destroyed and desecrated the thing. Ezekiel's tomb is not destroyed. Jonah's was pretty well destroyed, though. So at any rate, so Ezekiel wants to give some encouragement to the people. Now, Ezekiel was an extraordinary figure. Not only was he a prophet, he's also credited with starting the synagogue system, which didn't exist until they go to Babylon in exile, and he did it in order to keep the people together and keep them instructed in the faith. And so they come back, and now you've got these synagogues that get set up as places of learning. Because the only place you can make sacrifices at the temple is in Jerusalem because God chose the place. And he hadn't chosen some other place. So that can't happen. So they have synagogues, and they have synagogues all over the world in order to train up and keep the Jewish population in the diaspora all together. So Ezekiel says, I kind of need some sort of way to encourage the people that ultimately we will go back, that this is not a permanent state of affairs. So what happens is he sees this vision, and God takes him out into a valley where there's a lot of dry bones. In other words, these are long dead people. And I'm probably going to spend next week talking about the Jewish backstory of that, of the dry bones and where they come from and what it means and everything else. And so He comes and God tells him, prophesy to the bones. And he prophesies and blows on the bones. And so what happens is when he prophesies to the bones, they knit themselves back together. The sinews, the skin, all that kind of stuff comes on. They probably even had hair. So they pull all this back together. And then he says, breathe on the bones. And he breathes on the bones and they become an incredible army. Well, so the encouragement then to the people in exile is very simple. It's we're coming back. You might feel like dry bones. You might feel like there's no hope, and especially if you are an older person who clearly is too infirm or whatever to make it back from Babylon. That they will ultimately be restored. And you think about the bones of Jacob and Joseph that the Israelites carried up with them out of Egypt after having promised they would do that, and they take them to the land. So you see this same idea. Moses, I'm not Moses. Abraham buries Sarah in the land in a cave that he bought, the cave of Machpelah. So we see this idea about being in the land, and then ultimately in eschatology in Judaism, one of the things they believed is that the resurrection will take place for all Jews in the land. They will all be in Jerusalem, and the way they get there can be kind of interesting, to say the least. So these holes will develop in the ground. They'll go into the holes, or if they're in the ground, they'll move into the holes some way or another, and then they will roll sort of like marbles, and they'll pop up in the land. It is a bit of a purgatory idea in that because they should have been in the land is the point. And so it's not without pain. Let's say that you end up in Jerusalem. And the cool thing is the way they see it is that so all the people are resurrected in the land, and then the last people to be resurrected are Abram and Sarah. Why? Because they can see at that point the fulfillment of all the promises God made as they see all these children of Abraham. That's going to include us because we are children of Abraham, because we are children of faith. But this is ultimately, whether it's a vision or a metaphor or a reality, I have no earthly idea, and the Jews don't know either. They will not agree on this. Some say metaphor, some say no reality. Don't know what happened to them, but whatever. So at any rate, that's the way that they see this. It's a great encouragement, and it was a great encouragement when the Holocaust happened in Germany in World War II, and then ultimately that's fulfilled when they get the land in 1948. And so they see this again and again. And we need to see things in that same way. We need to see that God will restore all things, no matter how hopeless our life looks, and that we may never see the fulfillment of what we think of the promises of God in our lives. We may never see all those things, but the reality is that God says it ain't over. It's not over till it's over. What you think are dry bones may not be dry bones at all. And the same goes for evangelism, because that's one of the things that they discuss in Judaism is it worthwhile to go and speak to quote lapsed Jews, people who don't have any interest in the faith? Is it worth it or not? Because they call them dry bones, actually. And so the answer the rabbis give is it's always worth it because you never know what God might do. And that's the way we should think as well. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.